Purity. Oh, what a joy.
It's a good Monday. I'm happy to be here. Welcome to another episode of Let's Start Justice. My name is Mikkel Jackson.
And I'm Jade Williams.
All right, so I'm not in tip top shape today, but I'll try and bring some. Let me not push it. I was about to say vibes to the Justice Show, but let's not overdo with the adjectives now and so on. But yeah, it's certainly good to be here, and we're going to be continuing a conversation that we started to have a few weeks ago, and one I heard on Nationwide at 5 last week with Jamar Johnson and attorney at law Bert Samuels. So we're going to be having a discussion so the public can understand and appreciate the conversation about willful transmission of HIV, but beyond that intentional exposure that people have been calling for, we're also going to be having a conversation about disclosure generally and how that works within our context, not just legally, but culturally and socially when we look at the stigma and discrimination surrounding HIV. All right, and tomorrow is International Human Rights Day, so we're going to be talking a little bit about that in a few. Right, Jade?
For sure.
Yeah?
Yes.
All right. We're quite tired, so I asked the listeners to be with us. Yesterday was our Run for Rights. I'm let me say this. I don't think that course was marked properly.
I'm not letting you throw my team under the bus. The course was perfectly marked, ma'am. You are just unfit.
So, despite the leg pressing and I was in the gym and so on, carrying on with the excitement, I literally made it to the 1K marker.
I ran.
And then I flagged down the JFJ bus to return me to the venue.
Yes.
I couldn't. I really couldn't. But I tried. But it was a great day.
It was a good day. I managed to represent the team quite well. I did run.
Yes, Jade.
And I finished the
Actually,
5K.
you walked the 1K with me.
Yes, I did, out of courtesy.
You
I didn't
did?
want to leave you there by yourself. You seemed worried. I was worried about you.
Man, courtesy of Wisinko, one of our sponsors, I had the power aid at the
Yes.
1K marker, and I thought it could have, brought me to the 2K marker, but I had to stop.
It did its job in keeping you from passing out.
It did. So thank you to Wisinko, thank you to Mothers, thank you to Istratech and Starlight Production.
Royal Trophies.
Yes, Caribbean Dream, all of our sponsors, and kudos to the team. You guys did an awesome job. But I have to highlight the man of the event, Nicholas Richards, our community engagement and outreach officer. I think I may have to rethink Nicholas's title. It's quite lengthy.
Yeah, it's quite a mouthful.
Yes, but good going, guys. You guys were awesome. All right.
All right.
So the trivia.
All right. So we have our Did You Know and our trivia question. So we'll start with the Did You Know / right of the day for today. And that is on its way. Right, so this week's Did You Know is more of a Did You Know that something doesn't exist? And this has to do with some of the rights in our Charter of Rights. So we don't have in Jamaica a right to health in any capacity. In some places they have a right to good health or a right to an adequate standard of health. We have a right to a healthy environment. But when it speaks to health as in health care, we don't have that right extended here in our
So
constitution.
not like Guyana that has the right to health care,
Right.
and South Africa in their constitution.
Exactly. We also do not have a constitutional right to protection from discrimination on the basis of health status. So that essentially means if you have experienced discrimination because, for example, you were once infected with syphilis or you had cancer or you had HIV, nothing in our constitution speaks to your protection as a citizen here. So those are some gaps that we have, gaps that we've identified along with our NGO partners in the past. But I just wanted us all to be aware, the listeners, as to what exists. No.
Yeah, go ahead, dear.
I just wanted to switch to the trivia. So if you had a commentary on that, I'd allow it.
Well, we didn't do the week that was. We can discuss that towards the end of the program. But as you were talking about the right to health and broadening the categories that we have to protect us from discrimination, I think it's just important for the listeners to appreciate that when we're talking about constitutional reform, we have to agitate for broader constitutional changes to be made. So yes, the conversation right now is being had about the road to the republic, and from a principled position, I don't think we can say that we have Great Britain that had colonized our country for some 300 years. So we need to get rid of the monarchy from our constitutional framework. Certainly we support that. But there are a few things I just wanted to ask our listeners to consider as we talk about that. What type of president are we replacing the Governor General with? What would be the powers of the president? Who would elect the president? What is the people's involvement in that respect? Those are some of the questions I want us to speak to or consider, because we were told last week by Minister Fort, that Malahu Fort, the Minister of Legal and Constitutional Affairs, that the Republic Bill will come. But beyond that conversation, when we get to phase two, what Jade read earlier is what I really want to emphasize for the listeners to say, listen, we know that we have universal access to healthcare, despite the political platform, where our politicians had argued and said to us that you're going to be getting free healthcare a couple of years ago. That's not what we have here. We have universal access to healthcare. But we need to be looking at a constitutional framework where we have a right to health, because it also speaks to quality health care in some constitutions. Those are the things I would say for us to really educate ourselves a little bit more about and really agitate for some changes in that respect.
Absolutely. Thank you for that, Mikhail. All right, so we'll go to our trivia question, which is related to HIV, actually. So ARVs refers to this class of medication that is often used to treat HIV. So what does the acronym ARV stand for? And that's our normal trivia question. What does the acronym ARV stand for? And that is a kind of medication normally used to treat HIV. Now we have our 25th anniversary trivia question as well. And that has to do with a bit of JFJ's history. So who was the attorney at law that led the Grantspen 13 case? So this was JFJ's first case with the 13 men from Grantspen. Who was the attorney that led that matter? So you can respond to any other trivia questions in the chat on YouTube. You can respond via WhatsApp at 239-7583, or you can respond to our Instagram at JA4Justice.
All right, so let's get into the show for today. As we stated earlier, we're discussing the issue of willful transmission of HIV, exploring the laws around disclosure and transmission. And we're going to be joined by Glenroy Murray, who is the Executive Director of Equality for All Foundation, formerly JFLAG, and also to be joined by Patrick Layla, who's a Policy and Advocacy Officer at Jamaica AIDS Support for Life. Now, when we talk about willful transmission of HIV, we are referring to the deliberate act of exposing another person to the virus without their knowledge or consent, with the intention to or transmitting same to them. Now, there are some laws that address willful transmission of HIV, and it varies across different countries. And we're going to be discussing how the enforcement of such laws can actually reinforce stigma and discrimination against persons living with HIV.
The institution of these specific laws is something that we have debated in Jamaica. Advocates have pointed to other provisions as well as common law positions that they feel is sufficient to address the issue of willful transmission without creating a specified offense towards the community. So we're going to discuss.
Yeah, and let me say, when the 2018 Sexual Offences Act Joint Select Committee recommendation report was published, one of the recommendations made by the Director of Public Prosecution, Paula Llewellyn, was that there should be an expressed law dealing with the criminalization of HIV. So let me be very clear on JFJ's position in this respect. We do not support such legislation being made for the transmission of HIV, but that is not to say that when an individual intentionally transmit HIV, they should not be prosecuted. What we're seeing is that laws already exist to deal with this particular offense, and we have to be careful about the public health implications by having an expressed law being made. So we're going to be having the conversation with Mr. Murray and Mr. Layla about this, so you can understand and appreciate a little bit more why our position is what it is and the implications thereof for individuals, but also your own responsibility for your own health is also part of the discussion that we're going to be having. All right? Do we have the gentleman online?
Not as yet. It doesn't seem like we do. And we're coming up on the break in another 2 minutes. But I am hoping that when they join us, they'll be able to give us a bit of the history as to how we came to the legal position that we have now here in Jamaica, because we've had at least one significant case in our past that would have would have directly spoken to the issue.
Yeah, we're going to be discussing the George Flowers case. I don't remember the year, but this was a gentleman who I think Canada was trying to extradite him to have him face criminal charges there for transmitting the virus to 3 of 4 partners.
Yes.
And I say that so you can get the discussion that we're about to have, because while he had sexual intercourse with all 4 persons, only 3 of them had contracted the virus. So one of the things that we're going to be differentiating so you can have an appreciation of it is whether or not having sex with a person without disclosing if HIV is actually transmitted. The question you're going to be asking yourself, okay, how do I prove that you are the person who gave it to me, so to speak? And then if HIV was not transmitted, what exactly is the legal provision here in Jamaica compared to other countries, for example, Canada, that says, listen, you don't have to transmit anything, just the exposure itself is sufficient for you to be facing criminal charges. So we now have both Patrick and Glenroy on. Not Patrick as yet, but let's take the break and then we pick up with our guest.
Get it all in one go. Download and sign up now. The time by the 1JN Passport app is
1:15.
Unique Living's new arrivals are here. Revamp your space with sleek, fixed and sliding show panels, shower systems and faucets, stylish vanities, basins and kitchen sinks, closet and storage solutions, hanging aids and more. Available in different finishes and sizes to match your style. Visit them today and transform your space at shop number 630 Dunrobin Avenue, Kingston 10. Call 876-755-3661 or visit their website at uniquelivingja.com to shop.
Are you ready to turn your sales and marketing skills into high earnings? Nationwide 90 FM is searching for business development executives to build lasting client relationships. If you have experience across all stages of the sales cycle and possess strong communication, negotiation, and time management skills with a proven sales track record, this opportunity is perfect for you. Join our team and work with the top corporate brands, media agencies, and of course, our on-air personalities. Enjoy networking opportunities, professional growth, and competitive commissions. Ready to take the next step? Send your resume to hr@nationwidenewsnetwork.com today.
Welcome back to Let's Talk Justice. We are going to be discussing the issue of willful transmission of HIV. We are now joined by Glenroy Murray, who is the Executive Director of Equality for All Foundation. We were also to be joined by Patrick Layla. Unfortunately, he cannot make it anymore. But thank you for joining us, Glenroy. How are you? Glenroy, are you there?
Not hearing Glenroy, but he should be up and running, because he didn't run yesterday with us at the Run for Rights. His team did.
Yes, indeed. And they ran quite well as well.
Glenroy, are you hearing?
All right, so we seem to be having some issues with the connection here. But in the meantime, I think we can fairly get into some discussion. I know, as you mentioned, the George Flowers case, and you spoke to distinction between, what can happen if a person deliberately actually transmitted versus just exposure. And that's one of the things that the case actually contemplated, because the essence of the case was George Flowers' attorneys were arguing that because what Mr. Flowers would be implicated for in Canada was not an offense here in Jamaica, then he could not be extradited.
Yes.
And so the state now was looking, the state would have already signed off on the extradition order. So the state now was looking at whether or not these actions that the Canadian government would have been accusing Mr. Flowers of would fall into something that could be offenses here in Jamaica.
Yeah.
So,
and they looked at two sections under the Offences Against the Persons Act, Section 20 and Section 22.
Yes.
But I believe at the end of that judgment, they concluded that Section 22 would be more applicable for
Yes.
Mr. Flowers to be charged, possibly here in Jamaica.
That's right.
But one of the things I want the listeners to be very clear about, in Jamaica, there is no expressed law that mandates an individual to disclose their status to their partner. I want to be very clear. So the conversation here, well, unlike Canada, I know some people are saying, that we should have such law. And I think this conversation resurfaced because of two incidents last week. I made mention of one of them. It was a Jamaica Observer article that covered some conversations that Jamaica AIDS Support for Life they were having during World AIDS Day about people not being able to disclose to their partners because of fear of stigma, fear of domestic violence, acts of violence being perpetrated against them, not only by partners but also their family members. And of course, the matter involving Keyoda Mitchell, that was the woman who committed the brutal act of murder with the 8-year-old Danielle Rowe, because in her estimation, she found herself to be positive, HIV positive, and there were allegations that the father was the person who, and I hate using this terminology, infected her. So that was the basis of this conversation coming back to the surface. So one of the questions people have been asking, couple questions, should people who are living with HIV disclose to their partners? I know one individual asked on social media, if you disclose, when is the reasonable time to have that disclosure? First date, second date, when do you have it? Then the conversations are also being had. What is your responsibility in knowing your status as an individual? But beyond the disclosure information or conversation rather, what are the legal provisions that are in place in Jamaica when it comes to the willful transmission of HIV, intentionally transmitting the virus to someone, and how do you prove that? So I think that's where I want us to pick up now.
So I'll ask, Glenora, I hope you were hearing all of that. Welcome to the show. Thank you for joining us. And I think I'll just start with that general line of inquiry. What exactly can someone do here if they believe they have been willfully, purposefully, intentionally infected with HIV?
So thank you for having me. I know that these conversations are always tricky and controversial because of a lot of the stigma around the HIV and people's fears around contracting the virus. So from a purely legal standpoint, there is precedent based in British law that is highly persuasive in our Jamaican courts that says if somebody is intentionally infected, so to speak, with HIV, then that is grounds for a charge of assault occasioning bodily harm. And so if someone is in that kind of situation, then they can, for all intents and purposes, make a report to the police about the situation, and that person can be prosecuted for assault occasioning bodily harm. There is legal precedent for that happening. No, I've not necessarily seen that happen in Jamaica because of the intentionality of the infection has practical considerations that we'd have to work through from a prosecution perspective. But there is case law that the prosecution could follow to convict a person.
And based on that case law, Glenroy, can you indicate for the listeners what the possible term of that sentence could be? How long would they serve if they were to be convicted?
Okay, all right. So assault occasioning bodily harm. I remember correctly. I'm a little bit rusty on the sentencing related to this particular offense, but I know in some instances it goes up to 3 years at the parish court level, and I know if it's tried at the Supreme Court, it can go further.
Yeah.
The exact number escapes me at this moment.
Thank you so much.
Okay, so having heard what exists, there have been many recommendations for specific provisions to be implemented. Our sector has been vocally against that, but I'd want you to explain for our listeners why. Because a lot of persons would look at our recommendation and say we are not looking to protect the persons who are victims of these infections, quote unquote.
Non-suspected person.
Yes. So what is that opposition based in? If you could elaborate for our listeners.
So one has to look at the offense itself and what it would take to constitute said offense. So in simple terms, in order for somebody to be convicted of willful transmission, they have to know that they're HIV positive. And they have to know that they're HIV positive at the point at which they have sex with another person. And that other person needs to not be aware that the person that they're having sex with is also HIV positive. And so the concern, not just from the perspective of our sector, but internationally, is that if we focus our efforts on prosecuting people who transmit HIV, quote unquote, willfully, all that does is provide a defense for people by allowing them to say, well, they didn't know their status in the first place, which disincentivizes testing. And a lot of the public health effort has been people to understand that you need to know your status. And by knowing your status, whether it is positive or negative, then you can take the necessary steps to reduce the risk of infection or transmission to other people. So if you have a positive diagnosis, then you go on treatment. And if you continue on treatment, you keep up with your treatment regularly, then the treatment works, and then and you get to a point where you become undetectable. And the science tells us that once a person is undetectable, then they become untransmittable. And then the other part of it is that if you're negative, then you can, but you consider yourself still to be at risk, then you can take additional preventative measures. If you want to do more than use a condom, you can go on PrEP, which is pre-exposure prophylaxis, which is either a daily drug or event-based drug that you can take to reduce your risk of contracting HIV. The point is prosecution doesn't help with any of these public health efforts to actually drive down the transmission of the virus.
Yeah, go ahead, Glenroy. Finish up.
Yes, and while there's a sense of hurt that may come from somebody becoming positive, particularly in a context where they might have felt they were deceived. I think that there's a broader conversation to be had about, sexual health more broadly, such that recognizing that facing the people that we imagine might be the positive people who are infecting the rest of us doesn't actually solve anything, because in my estimation, and the data shows us that a lot of the people who are positive are on treatment, even though we have some, there's some data issues with our numbers nationally. Yes. A lot of the people who are positive and are linked to care, a lot of them end up being virally suppressed. And so there might be a situation in which you have sex with somebody who is positive, might have told you that they were positive, mind you, and you become HIV positive, but not through that person. You might have had sex with somebody else who's positive, but you don't know what their status is. Right?
And that's the exact difficulty we're having, because if the matter is to be prosecuted, how do you prove all of those variables in terms of when did you actually contract the virus? Because I know while in some jurisdiction you may have those, technological advancements and so on to indicate when the time of diagnosis actually occurred. I'm not sure we're there in Jamaica at this moment sufficiently enough to say that we would want to go down this road. So that's the difficulty I'm also having, Glenroy.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, the standard still is, as far as I'm aware, and a medical professional can correct me, that even if you get a negative test today, it is only valid for the period up to the 3 months before you took the test.
Yes.
So therefore, there's that 3-month window where you could have still been positive, but you received a negative test because HIV takes a while to show up in the blood based on the testing that we're using now.
Yeah.
And so someone could reasonably have had sex with someone thinking they're negative, but they were actually positive. And it's in that area of uncertainty that I think when we overly focus on prosecution rather than equipping everybody with the knowledge, the tools, and the sexual health commodities to reduce the risk of contracting HIV, that we get lost. And so I think also a lot of these conversations come up with, especially the most recent incidences, where people think that there somehow violence, including up to fatal violence, is an appropriate response to a positive diagnosis. And I flat out disagree with that position. It is not. But for, and even then, but for a situation of non-sexual assault, most persons enter into sexual arrangements consensually and going to it aware of the risks outside of just HIV. There are other STIs.
Glenn, hold that thought for me, because that's what I want to pick up. Your own responsibility. What are the risks, and what does consent really mean when you're having unprotected sex with somebody else? Let's take a break.
At the Jamaica Customs Agency, we care for our employees, customers, stakeholders, citizens, and our country. Customs cares. The temperature by the Jamaica Customs Agency is
31 degrees Celsius here in Kingston and 29 out west in Montego Bay.
Catch the E-Zone with me, the Stinger Honeybee, alongside
Kareem Boy Ting.
as we turn up the heat in the street.
New show.
New vibes.
Same us.
Same us.
Monday to Friday, 3 to 5 p.m.
Right here on Nationwide 90 FM.
We'll bring you entertainment news.
We'll take away your Monday blues.
You don't want to miss a week with us.
We'll talk health.
Well,
jump into the mix.
Or the hot seat.
Don't miss the brain buster.
Or the crazy giveaway.
I mean, is this planet Earth?
Is it?
I don't know. Let me check. Either way, it's got a buzz.
And a bugger thing.
Ow.
Welcome back to Let's Talk Justice. We have been discussing the willful transmission of HIV with Glenroy Murray from Equality for All Foundation. Before the break, we were talking about the issue of consent and what does consent mean when exposing yourself to sexual risk. So Glenroy, I'll ask you to pick up your thought there.
Sure, no problem. I know this opinion might, shock some people, but I'm of the view, and I think this view is actually widely held when we have conversations around pregnancy, but whenever we have HIV-related conversations, the opinion shifts. That if you have sex without a condom, you are having sex knowing the possibility that outside of the sexual engagement, something else could potentially happen. Meaning, you're having sex with the risk that there might be pregnancy, or you might contract an STI, or you might contract HIV. And so there's an outside response, a knee-jerk response when people decide that, oh, I developed HIV because I had sex with you, and therefore I must attack or physically harm you, or up to killing you. And what that does, it removes completely any responsibility that each adult individual has in making sure when they're engaging in sexual practices that they do what they must to protect their sexual health as they see it. Any engagement with sex involves the risk of contracting an STI. And so we can't quickly just jump to blaming another person. No. I acknowledge people's fear and feeling that if you are having sex with me and you know that you have an STI, then you have a responsibility to share that with me. And in an ideal world, yes, I would agree with that person. But we also live in a world in Jamaica where, one, most people aren't doing their routine testing the ways that they should. Because outside of HIV, there are other STIs that, if left untreated, can do severe harm to your body. Most people don't recognize that if you leave syphilis untreated in your body, you can die.
Yes.
But Glenda, I wanted to jump in 1 second because you said something I want the listeners to appreciate. Even in Canada, where HIV non-disclosure is criminalized, I remember a couple of years ago, one of their parliamentarians, they were trying to push forward a legislation that would essentially mount a defense for an individual not to be prosecuted. So, for example, some of the provisions that the parliamentarian in Canada was putting forward is to say, for example, if your viral load is so low, where it becomes undetectable. So in other words, it's very, very low, where the chances of passing on the virus to someone else is virtually impossible, so to speak, then that is a defense. They also said if the individual wore a condom, then it suggests that they would have taken reasonable care not to transmit the virus. Or if their partner is on PrEP, that's another reasonable care that would have been taken. So, as you were speaking, these were some of the things that I would suggest that we look into. But the point is that in Canada, they were actually considering these provisions proposed as an avenue where an individual can say, listen, I'm taking my ARVs, I'm taking them every day on time based on where I'm at. I am undetectable, so the chances of passing on the virus is not something that is going to be possible based on where the science is. I wore a condom with my partner and I encourage my partner to get tested. So my question to you is, Glenroy, if we were to put some of these provisions in Jamaica's context, would you then be in support of perhaps a law that would better clarify willful transmission? Or are we still saying that, listen, any such express law is going to be counterproductive to public health?
What I would say is that if we had to have such a law, then I would prefer one that went into that kind of detail, that acknowledged that all persons living with HIV are not monolithic and they're not the same, and that there's a difference in risk. It's with somebody who is consistent with their medication and therefore has become virally suppressed or undetectable versus somebody who's, not necessarily there yet and takes the risk of having sex with people without warning or disclosing in particular ways, knowing the risk that presents to their sexual partner. So I would love those nuances. However, personally, I think we have enough within the general criminal law, and the reality is most people, that law has never really been used in Jamaica because of the other related reasons. I mean, persons who become positive, their first thought in most instances is not oh, I need to go and prosecute this person. Most of them want to figure out how they're going to manage for the rest of their lives with HIV. And once they recognize that this is a possibility, that becomes their focus. And there's tons of support through both NGOs and government to support them to get on a path to viral suppression. And so, whilst I think that there should be an avenue for a person who is errant and who goes around, so to speak, as we imagine them, and quote unquote infecting a bunch of people, the reality is that that avenue is there and no one has used it. Maybe because of lack of knowledge, so maybe know that people have a better idea. You might see some report being filed, I don't know. But I think we have enough already. But the reality is that this is not an easily prosecutable, so to speak, offense. And what might end up happening is that we might focus on whether or not disclosure happened, and then making presumptions about whether or not this positive person I slept with is actually the person that transmitted the virus to me, rather than actually bringing people to justice, so to speak. And I think we might end up using more resources that could be better spent supporting persons living with HIV and providing a better, more wholesome and widespread public health response to reduce transmission amongst the general population and in key populations.
Yeah, there's a question I wanted to clarify, but before we ask you that question, for the listeners, if you test positive for HIV, the public health response would demand that you do what you call a contact tracing exercise, and that's not the individual who does it, it's the public health authorities. So they would ask you questions about your current and past sexual partners to assess the possible exposure, and then they would make contact with those individuals anonymously, of course, so that those persons can be tested. So just to say that the public health response, they do have provisions in place to safeguard and ensure as best as possible that persons who are exposed following a HIV positive test, they would be so engaged to come in and get themselves tested based on whatever information that patient would have relayed. There's a question, Glenroy, as we move on here, about the matter of marital rape. And you know, I just to indicate again, a woman cannot be raped by her husband, but Section 5 of the Sexual Offences Act, Jade Glenroy, that's the only section that expressly states that if a man knowingly,
yes, if he knowingly has sexual intercourse, well, unconsensual sexual intercourse with his wife,
yes,
whilst he is infected with a sexually transmitted infection, knowing that he is and not informing her of that, then it can be considered rape under the Sexual Offences Act.
And I heard that on a recent interview, Glenroy, but I had a little bit of a discomfort with the context within which that particular section was articulated, because it would suggest that if a husband willfully transmit HIV, then he could be prosecuted. But to my mind, that particular section more broadly is speaking to the conditions that must be met to indicate that marital rape can actually occur. I'm not sure if you have any thoughts on that.
I mean, I'm more minded to agree with your assessment of it, because I don't think that section concerns itself with the transmission itself. Based on its wording, what it concerns itself with is what are the conditions under which the law says a woman could rightly, or a wife could rightly say no to her husband, and we would take it seriously. Otherwise, we won't take it seriously. But in these circumstances, we will. And it says if the partner has an STI. And so I don't think the thought there is that transmission must have happened. but more so that this now gives a woman an out. And so if the sex then happens, then it's no longer consensual because it wasn't informed consent, which I could see how people could see some type of overlap, but it's in my mind completely different.
Yes.
And based on the wording that I saw, based on my interpretation of the wording, even if there was informed, as in she was informed of his status, and then he forced himself on her, it would not be rape because it relies on her lack of knowledge for it to be rape. So if he did inform her, if disclosure was made and they had unconsensual sex, that would not fall into the conditions that are protected under Section 5, based on my interpretation.
Yeah, I just wanted to clarify because the interview I heard last, I think there was some conflation of that particular section. But I think to the listener's question, however, if the other provisions around willful transmission, Glenroy, are to be tested, Section 22, for example, within the Offence Against the Persons Act that the George Flowers case had made mention, would it be applicable to married couples? Is the question perhaps the listener wants clarity around.
So
in other words, if I were to be married, would and my husband, I found out I'm positive and I know I've been faithful and I got myself tested last year out of an abundance of caution because I know I'm to get tested every year. And now I know myself, the doctor says I'm positive. Could I then go to the police and say my husband, passed on this virus to me because nobody else could have? And he could be charged.
In my mind, yes. Simply because, I think it will boil down to a question of how the police officers interpret the section. But to be clear, marriage is not a defense, so to speak, to assault occasioning bodily harm. It's a completely different offense dealt with under a different piece of legislation. And so because this offense is treated as one of the, trespass to the person type offenses, distinct from the sexual offenses, then it would allow for that kind of wiggle room, because what you're saying is you assaulted me, and it's not like a husband can say, "It's my wife, of course I can assault her." So there's a distinction there, and of course you can't actually consent to assault occasioning bodily harm at law in any event. You can consent to certain forms of assault, but there are degrees, and so it should still be a possibility using that type of framing. But in an untested legal system, it's hard to give a definitive answer.
What I will say in commentary on that is that when we looked at in the common law deliberations that we've seen, consent it was at one stage, I know it's at another stage. So at first, consenting to the sex at all would mean that you could no longer bring an action because you consented to the sex, and the legal position was that you consented to the exposure, all the possible risks of sex, and that would include being infected with an STI. Now the position is that informed consent position. So
yes.
Where you could have consented to the sex, the court is of the position that you could not consent to certain forms of harm, and it would be unreasonable to think that someone having the knowledge would have consented to that harm. So even where you consent to unprotected sex, if you were not informed, that is still able to support your case against the person who you think would have infected you. Whereas that person can also use your consent now as a defense if it is that they would have disclosed, and then it would be a he said, she said kind of thing.
I consented not to wear condom on the basis that you're going to be faithful to me alone.
Well, I consented not to wear condom on the basis that I believed that you were not a risk to me based on your sexual status. It's very crazy.
I think, Glenroy, as we're having this conversation, because we have these types of conversations all the time, all of us who work within the sector. For example, we say to persons that get yourself tested, and we promote, for example, partner testing. So you meet someone, you believe that this person is an individual you can, make a little life with, so to speak. Or you just see this person and you like them and you say, okay, 1 year, two of us together. And you go together, you get yourself tested, whether together or individually, you show each other your test and so on. So you're good for now. But the question is, still, you decide to have unprotected sex and somebody else went ahead and they had sex with another individual, and then, positive status emerges. So the point I'm making is that everything is nuanced, so to speak, and things happen. So I don't know what consent would truly mean in a conversation like this as well. So what do we tell the people, Glenroy? Long and short.
I think what we tell people is that, and this is a hard pill to swallow, that your sexual health is ultimately your responsibility, and that while we understand that you have relationships and that relationships do involve love and trust, and in those contexts you might, take risks, you knowingly take those risks, and even if that leads to unforeseen or unexpected outcomes, that violence is not an appropriate response to that. Mm-hmm. However, if there is some cloak of deception happening, there is a potential legal response for you that you are well within your rights to report to the police and seek some form of justice. Mm-hmm. However, at the end of the day, that person being locked up won't change the fact that you've contracted whichever STI, HIV, chlamydia, herpes, whatever. And so you still have to deal with the reality that you contracted that STI, and that will not solve that situation. And the prosecution, however long that will take, will not fix that. Mm-hmm. And so at the end of the day, it is your responsibility to take care of your sexual health, because no amount of court process will not make you negative again.
Yeah. And, I have to repeat, we said it last week, that if you recently did an HIV test and the results were positive and you're not coping, or you want to disclose your status safely to your partner, you can contact the Jamaica Network of Seropositives or Jamaica AIDS Support for Life, and they do provide that support. It's called partner notification, but again, it has to be done safely. So there are some things that they ask you to consider. Is your partner violent, for example, and so on, just to ensure that when you make a decision to disclose, it's one that you consider all the factors and it is safe for you to do so. I have to say that because we wouldn't want a conversation to compel anyone to disclose if it is not safe for them to do so, because again, we do operate in a high stigma environment and people must protect themselves both ways. So Glenroy, thank you so much. In the last words?
I think I said all I needed to say. But just say that in all of this, I think it's important for us to recognize that a positive diagnosis is not the end of your life. Mm-hmm. And it can be the beginning of a new lease on life. And so perhaps what we need to start doing more of as a response, as a nation, is learning more from persons living with HIV about how they're able and how they have been able to live very fulfilling lives after years of living with HIV, rather than jumping to punishing and ostracizing. I think this is an opportunity for us to learn more about what's been happening in Jamaica over the past 30 years in managing HIV.
Yeah, thank you so much. That was Glenroy Murray, Executive Director of Equality for All Foundation.
All right. Mikhail, I wanted to say something as well. Having been looking at the chat and so on, I wanted to clarify a few things. I saw some commentary in regards to that marital rape discussion, and someone was asking if the wife would be held to the same standard. Good question. And as we know, one of the challenges with our Sexual Offences Act is how it is deliberately not gender neutral. So unfortunately, perpetrators are male for most of the offenses. And so including marital rape, the only person that could commit the offense is the husband. And so
So it's one where a woman cannot be raped
right.
unless these conditions are met, but the man can't be raped. Man can't be raped
At
generally,
all.
you know. So for Section 5, we have been calling for it to be repealed entirely.
Yes.
And again, that was promised in the 2018 recommendation report. We heard from Senator Kamina Johnson-Smith, Minister of Foreign Affairs, last year that the government would be fast-tracking that repeal. That was last year. It's now November 2024. Well, no, actually, it's December.
It's
Why
December.
am I always behind time?
It's December.
It's
And
December,
that was
yes.
from about July of 2023.
So again, it's important for all of us to be aware of these things and call again on our parliamentarians to act. It's a simple repeal, you know. It can be one line. Repeal Section 5. That's it. Full stop. And then the Governor General sign off on it.
Absolutely, for sure.
It's nothing too technical. All right. So quite a bit was said earlier. Just to indicate that today is International Anti-Corruption Day,
Yes, it
December
is.
9, and the theme is Uniting with Youth Against Corruption, Shaping Tomorrow's Integrity. And the Integrity Commission, they had a supplement, I think today, have a supplement today.
Yes, in both papers, in both major newspapers. as well.
Okay.
Yeah.
And I issued a little comment on JFJ's behalf, just to indicate a couple things that we know the current landscape involving the Integrity Commission, but Jamaicans for Justice, we continue to stand with the institution. It is an important one to tackle corruption in Jamaica, and we would urge all public officials and parliamentarians in particular to express that they also stand in support with the Integrity Commission. Standing in support with an institution does not necessarily mean that you support every single decision or how a decision was taken, but you support the institution and its establishment in terms of its role and function. Now, we also should be setting examples as leaders, thought-provoking leaders, wherein we know what integrity looks like and we encourage our young people to also adopt those standards of integrity. Help them to have a moral compass as they make a decision. Help them to understand and appreciate what corruption really means and to challenge some of the language that we normally use in Jamaica, like it's just a little hustle. We just eat a little food. We need to start challenging those types of conversation and lines that we use in our current context. Again, just showing our young people what integrity looks like and how they ought to act, because they have a role to play. So again, we're shaping our new leaders, and we just need to explain these institutions and principles and moral standards to them so that we can tackle corruption once and for all, because corruption is not a small thing, Jade. When people don't spend their money well, it means that you're taking away money from healthcare. It means that you're taking away money from education. We see we have quite a bit of children in high school that reading at grade 3 and grade 4 levels.
Yes.
But perhaps if we weren't taking the funds and not spending them properly, misappropriating our funds here by public officials and us turning a blind eye to it, then perhaps we would be much further in our development in this country. So just a little bit of a food for thought as we celebrate the day.
Thank
All
you
right.
for that, Mikhail.
So our expo.
Yes, that is tomorrow. We will be at Emancipation Park for our Justice for All Expo. It begins at 12. We'll be having booths on top of booths on top of booths, so services will be out. We'll be having Ministry of Legal and Constitutional Affairs. We'll be having Jamaica Network of Seropositives. We'll be having Jamaica AIDS Support for Life. We'll be having those persons from the PATH program giving you the information. People from the Ministry of Justice speaking about expungement. We'll be doing the HIV and syphilis testing on site. So for those of you who listen to today's show and want to know your status, you can come out tomorrow at Emancipation Park. We're starting at 12. We'll have prizes, giveaways, performances, or performance. But we'll be out. And we'll be there until 5 p.m.
Yeah. And yes, so tomorrow is International Human Rights Day.
Absolutely.
And I just want to plug here on behalf of our colleagues at the Ministry of Legal and Constitutional Affairs that they're also going to be having an event in the morning. You can go on their social media pages. It's a youth debate that they're having. I don't remember the exact topic, but go on their social media platform and see. And I have to do this because when we invited the Legal and Constitutional Affairs Ministry to the expo, the agreement that we had was that they would come, but they would shift their event to the morning. So partnership is important, so I will be there, but it's a really good debate that our youngsters are raging on about. So I do encourage you to get on and watch them. And if I know some of the debaters and they're very, very good. And I've been so privileged. I was telling you a couple of weeks ago when I heard the youngsters down by Manchester
yes.
and oh, my lordy, how these children spoke. You know, we look forward to the future. Our future is safe here in Jamaica. Let's not be concerned or be too challenged with some of what we see happening and say, no, Jamaica now go on good. No, we have a bright future ahead of us. We just have to continue shaping our youngsters. They're brilliant young people. They just need that compass to help them, steer in the right path, is what I would say. But I look forward to the Ministry of Legal and Constitutional Affairs event for tomorrow and JFJ's event, obviously. So I will leave from there and go to the event.
All right.
So thankfully, I have an excuse not to help you all pack out anything.
Whatever. We will see you guys at 12 tomorrow at Emancipation Park. Don't miss it. I'm Jade Williams.
And I'm Michael Jackson. Have a good day.
By justice, the people's champion. Justice for all. Justice under the law. Justice, Jamaica demand. Right to life, right to liberty. Out of many, we are one in a Jamaica. Make it a better place for the boys and girls. Created equal by the creator. For equal rights and opportunities. No to unlawful detention and police brutalization. Class, gender, race or religion. We not tolerate discrimination.
To join the fight against injustice, contact us at 755-4524 or JamaicансForJustice.org.
The people's champion.
Are you ready to turn your sales and marketing skills into high earnings? Nationwide 90 FM is searching for business development executives to build lasting client relationships. If you have experience across all stages of the sales cycle and possess strong communication, negotiation, and time management skills with a proven sales track record, this opportunity is perfect for you. Join our team and work with the top corporate brands, media agencies, and of course, our on-air personalities. Enjoy networking opportunities, professional growth, and competitive commissions. Ready to take the next step? Send your resume to hr@nationwidenewsnetwork.com today.
Catch the E-Zone with me, the Stinger Honeybee, alongside